So this windshield wiper blade on a car rotates back and forth just like they all do. When the wiper blade is furthest to the left or farthest to the right, the measure of the angle formed by the wiper blade and the vertical center line is 0.75. I'm going to underline that as soon as my Apple Pencil starts working. All right, 0.75 radians. At time t equals 0 seconds, the wiper blade is farthest to the left. The wiper blade then rotates to the right, passes through the vertical center line, and at time t equals 1 second, the wiper blade is farthest to the right for the first time. Then the wiper blade rotates to the left, passes the vertical center line, and is farthest to the left again at time t equals 2 seconds. So as the wiper blade rotates, the measure of the angle formed by the wiper blade and the vertical center line periodically increases and decreases. A sinusoidal function h models the measure of that angle in radians. We've never done a problem like this one. So it's always been the height, like the height of a speck on a spinner or something. So this one, the equation gives you the angle in radians formed by the wiper blade and the center line. A negative value of h indicates the wiper blade is to the left of the vertical line, and a positive value of h indicates the wiper blade is to the right of the vertical center line. Okay, so we have this graph that should look super familiar to you. We're going to figure out the coordinates of F, G, J, K, and P. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to highlight some things that are important. So at 0 seconds, the wiper blade is farthest to the left. And at 1 second, farthest to the right. And then back at 2 seconds, we're farthest to the left again. So what does that tell you about the period? It's not 1, it's 2 seconds. So a full rotation is from the left to the right, back to the left. That happens in 2 seconds. I'm gonna jot that down. It's not something that they'll grade, but it's helpful when we're figuring this out. All right. And so they give us exactly what we need to get an ordered pair for F. When it tells you that at 1 second is furthest to the right for the first time, furthest to the right is going to be when that angle is the largest. That's going to be a maximum. And then the angle, maximum angle is going to be 0.075. So what does that mean that the ordered pair for F is going to be? What's the time when it's going to be the biggest? We just highlighted it. What time is it going to be the largest? 1 second. And what is the largest is going to be? 0.75. Very good. All right, so this one is set up way different than the ones that we practiced. It tells us another point also. It tells us next that at time, it's farthest to the left at time 2 seconds. So what order or what letter is that going to be? The 2 seconds, and it's going to be J. So 2 seconds. And then farthest to the left, the angle is going to be negative 0.75. All right. Now I know my height at P is going to match my height at F. Or not my height. I shouldn't say height. My angle. All right. Another thing to remember is that, and some of you were trying to do it on that multiple choice question, it just wasn't working out for you, that max to max is 1 period. I know my period is 2. So the time to go from this max to this max should be 2. So what should this value be? 3. And then what about the midlines here? the angle, normally it's the height between these two. What would that be? 0. All right, what about those times? This, I think, is what you're saying. 1.5 and 2.5. Very good. Now, the way they do these points is you get 1 point for getting all of the first coordinates right, all the t values right, and you get 1 point for getting all of the h values right. So one of those is probably going to be easier for you to figure out, but it's doable. All right, the next question for B is that a function h can be written in the form of h of x equals all that with a sign. We're going to find the values of a, b, c, and d. So looking at what we have, do we already know what a is? I know it's been a while since we've done this, but 0.75. It should be the height, the distance between the middle and the max is going to be 0.75. Do we know what d is? D is the midline. What is the midline? 0. And then B and C, you are going to have to do some calculations to figure out. Do you all remember how to find B? 2 pi over the period. Very good. That's just a note for you. You don't have to write that out on your test if you don't want to. But we already said earlier that the period is 2. So we're doing 2 pi over 2, which is just going to be pi. I need to look and see how they give these points, because 2 points is going to come from here. I'm fairly certain. I'll look at it as soon as we're done. All right, C is going to be challenging. I think C is the most challenging one out of all of these, but again, it's extremely doable. So if we're talking about the parent function sign, where does the max occur? You guys remember? Can you picture it? Pi over 2. Good. Jot that down if you don't remember it. All right. So what we did when we learned this before, is we would take everything that is in the parentheses after the sign. So if you're looking at your yellow paper on part B, I'll scoot down just a second. What we're going to do is take this stuff, and we're going to set it equal to where that maximum usually occurs on sign. So it's going to be B times T plus C should equal that pi over 2. That's where the first maximum occurs on the sign. All right, now you should have already found B was pi. This is tricky. What are we going to put in for the t? It should be a t value from your curve. Does anybody remember? It should be from the maximum at f, always. Should be from point F. And so that maximum occurs when t is 1 on our graph. All right, and then this is a 2-step process. One step is to divide by pi, or divide by whatever is in front of the parentheses. So what do you get when you divide pi over 2 by pi? 1 over 2. You can also multiply by the reciprocal if you want to. All right, and then finally, you're going to subtract. And what's 1/2 minus 1? Negative 1/2. And it's up to you. You can do decimals or fractions. They do not specify on here. They don't care. Either way. Plus 2. All right, and if you forget how to do all of that, when you get to part 3, as long as you remember rules about increasing, decreasing, and concavity, you can get these right without getting anything else right on this whole problem. So part C is pretty much always going to look the same. These will change. On this particular one, we're looking at the section from G to J. So G to J is this section right here. And we're answering questions about H. And so which is true about H? So would you say that H is positive or negative there? Negative. So you're looking, the H values are the second values. From between 0 and that, it's definitely negative. And would you say that H is increasing or decreasing there? Decreasing. If it's falling, decreasing. So all you have to do on that one is say negative and decreasing is just put a D. You do not have to explain. Just write it, move on. Make sure it's legible. You're fine. All right, and then the second part of that question says to describe how the rate of change of H is changing. So the rate of change of H, the only thing that matters is concave up or concave down. What would you say this one is? Concave up. So you can start off with that, or you can start off with the other part. I'm going to start off with because the graph of H is concave up on the interval. You can, I'm going to leave it out interval, but you can say on T sub 1 to T sub 2. And then I'm going to quote the problem. I would say the rate of change of H is increasing on that interval. Okay. So if you include all that, you're for sure going to get it right. The only other thing you would say here is if it had been concave down, that would be down. It would still say everything else, and that would say decreasing. Yes, ma'am. To find C, you said equal to 0. Okay, so we're going to do that on the next one, actually. Let's go to the green one. All right, green one is about the press to right wheel. Okay, here we go. All right, so we have this price to right wheel. It's a large spinner. I'm sure you guys have seen it before. I hope so anyway. So there's a pointed indicator in the center position, and the wheel is 8 feet in diameter. Point S is on the outside edge of the wheel. All right, so they're doing test spins. As the wheel spins at a constant rate, the height of S above level ground periodically increases and decreases. We do know that at T equals 0, it's going to be right here. All right. So this is more like what we did when we did these before. So what should your midline be? 5. So in the middle, those heights are going to be 5s. If the diameter is 8, what should we add to that midline to get the maximum height? We don't add 8.
I know
4. So that's going to be 9 and 9. And then we subtract that 4 to get the minimum height. All right, doing that gets you a point. Then figuring out all the other stuff also gets you a point. I felt like this one was pretty challenging to figure out the T values. Because like at first I was like, oh, okay, it starts in the middle. So that would mean that this would be 0, but that is not true. So it messed me up for a second. So it starts at the middle, but then does it go to a max if it's rotating this way? It goes to a min. So what I had to do, and some of you may not have to do this, but what I had to do is extend it here and make this my 0. Now, if it hadn't been like a real life equation where negative time made sense, I could have made this one be 0, but you can't have negative time. If you get negative time, I don't think they're gonna give you real points for it. Okay, so I have said that max to max is definitely a period, but this middle to this middle would also be a period of the sine graph or cosine graph. So what is the period? Let's see. I think I skipped over some important things when I was trying to save time. It does tell you that it completes 2 rotations every second. Is that a period or is that a frequency? 2 rotations every second. That's a frequency. So what is that going to make the period? Do I remember? 1/2 is the reciprocal. All right, so from 0 to G, that should be a full period. So that G T value should be 1/2. All right, so when we did this before, we would find halfway points. And so here, the T value is 1/2. This one here should be halfway between 0 and 1/2. What would that be? 1/4. That's not an answer to our question, but we're getting there. All right, and then F is going to be halfway between 1/4 and 1/2. Do you guys remember how to find halfway points? Some people can visualize fractions in their head, and that's amazing. Some people can't. It's okay. Anytime you want to find halfway between 2 numbers, you find their average. You add them together, and you divide by 2. Now, if you hate fractions, you can do this as a decimal if you want to. I love fractions. So what do you get when you add 1/4 and 1/2? If you're a baker, you need to know this. 3/4. If you don't know it, you can find a common denominator. 1/2 is the same as 2/4. That you add that and you get 3/4. All right, what's half of 3/4? 3/8. All right, if you can't do that, it's okay. You're going to take the 3/4 and you're going to multiply it by the reciprocal of 2, and then multiply across the numerator and across the denominator. All right, so now at this point, I would kind of be done with those halfways and realize that each one of these sections is an 1/8. So we start off with 3/8, and then 1/2 is 4/8. So what should this one be? 5/8. So you just do 5/8, 6/8, 7/8. Right. So sometimes it's just going by great numbers like 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5. Sometimes it's going by 8. So you just don't know what you're going to get, and just take faith in that you don't have to get every single question right. So do your best. Okay, let's look at this one. So do we know what A is? 4 is going to be the distance between the middle and the max. Do we know what D is? It's going to be the middle, pi. All right, to find B, we're going to take 2 pi, and we're going to divide it by our period. How do you divide by 1/2? Oh, I really want y'all to know this. When you divide by 1/2, you're just multiplying by 2. All right, and this is the question Olivia asked. So sometimes we just don't know. It's either going to be sine or it's going to be cosine. Sometimes it is cosine. So for the parent cosine, the first max, do you guys know where it occurs? 0. So I think the cosine ones are just slightly easier to do than the sine ones. So we're going to do that same thing where we're going to take E times T plus C, but this time we're going to set it equal to 0 because this one is telling you that it's a cosine function. What are we going to put in for B? 4 pi. What are we going to put in for T? 3/8. Right? And then our steps are exactly the same. We're going to divide by whatever is in front of the parentheses.
Where does it say that's a cosine function?
On the back of what you're looking at right now. Flip it over. And then the other step is to subtract. Now, what's wonderful about for your response is that if you mess up on something, like if you didn't have that this was 3/8, the person grading your test is going to look at what you have. And if it's right for your mistake, you're still going to get those points. So don't think that, like, if you mess up at the beginning, you're done, because you're not. They're going to look at every little thing you do. All right, and then the last question, I'm going to change it. If you've worked ahead and you're already done, don't worry about changing it. But it is the exact same as the other one we did, so I'm going to change it to be from J to K. But again, if you've already done it, don't worry about changing it. It's fine. So let's say we're looking at from J to K. And when we answer if positive or negative, we're looking at these numbers. So between J and K, would you say those numbers are positive or negative? Positive. And then if you're saying increasing or decreasing, you're looking to see if as you go from left to right, is it going up or down? What do you think? Up, so it's increasing. So you would say positive and increasing, which is A, since we changed it. All right, and then for the second part, we're looking at concavity. So would you say that section is concave up or down? Up. So this one is going to be exactly the same thing we wrote. So because the graph of H is concave up on the interval from T1 to T2, and I'm going to quote the problem, the rate of change of H is increasing on that interval.